Hey everybody,
Hi everyone.
it's the last Mario Kart Monday.
It's the final Mario Kart Monday before this show gets taken off the air. The executives
Oh
up at Master Questers, Head Questers, when they said if you don't get enough ratings by the end of the month, oh boy, this whole setup you got here, this whole thing. Or wait, no, we're flipped. So this whole thing is kaput. We're sending it to the dustbin.
R.I.P.
It's over. It's all over. So yeah. Firsty.
Firsty. Are you firsty?
Oh, look at that firsty boy. So yeah. Good job, C. Dewey.
Well done, C. Dewey. Proud of you.
Proud of you. So yeah, so let's just kick back, enjoy some races. And whoops.
You're spamming.
Spammy boy.
Greta's gonna ban you.
Yeah, the Greta who's here is gonna ban him. He's gonna be banned. So, I don't know, do you want to cut to the chase or do you want to wait a little bit? Should we continue the facade that this segment has been always about Mario Kart and never about anything else?
Nah, let's just get to it.
Alright.
Hey, Sans.
So, I just wanted to say, I wanted to come clean after so many episodes of Mario Kart Monday that when Link rides the motorcycle as Bo, it's really good. No.
Starting off with the sexy topics.
I mean, that's the brand that we've cultivated over the past year of Mario Kart Monday. No.
It seems appropriate that also the topic we've planned for today involves anime.
Yeah, since that was the first topic of Mario Kart Monday, welcome to the stream, Arlen Poison.
Hey, Arlen.
No, but seriously, today we're going to talk about the live adaptation of the Fullmetal Alchemist, which we just watched.
We just watched it
moments ago.
Yep.
So as you can probably tell from our tone, we loved it.
It was so good.
It was both faithful to the original source material as well as a coherent and a cohesive narrative throughout.
Yeah. It was an adaptation. It was good as an adaptation and as a standalone.
The characters were fleshed out, and all of the emotional beats were well earned.
And everything made perfect sense.
The way...
Both if you've seen it and if you haven't seen it. The original. Okay, let's start our critique, shall we?
It's bad.
It's bad. It's really bad.
It's bad?
It's so bad.
It's,
Not that it's surprising, but...
boring.
It is true.
It's really a shame because here's the thing. The Death Note live adaptation is, very good. It's very bad, but it's very funny because it's just really off the rails dog shit.
Yeah.
It's like a
It's at least so bad it's entertaining.
Yeah.
Whereas the Fullmetal Alchemist live action adaptation's just kind of boring.
It's boring. And also it's
And there are a lot of issues with it, which we'll get more into depth, but I think the biggest thing is that they condensed it so much that they put in a lot of the really important emotional beats, but they didn't put any of the build up. So when you got to these important plot points, you don't care.
Just so we're clear, there will be full spoilers for Fullmetal Alchemist. This is full spoiler Alchemist right now.
Full spoilers for all versions of Fullmetal Alchemist manga, 03 anime Brotherhood,
movie.
Conqueror of Shambhala, for some reason, if we bring it up.
The fan fiction I wrote when I was 15. All of them.
As any loyal viewers probably know, if you've been watching Mario Kart Monday where I ramble on about anime, Fullmetal Alchemist is my favorite anime.
Yeah.
So I was not surprised, but still felt very wounded by how bad this movie was.
Alright, sorry C. Dewey, check you later. He just started watching Brotherhood, so he's gonna go away now.
I mean, we can try to talk about non-spoiler stuff first, and then
for what it's
talk
worth.
about spoiler things and give you a warning.
Sure, okay.
If you want to stick around for a little bit, at least.
So this will be spoiler-free for the first bit. Let's talk about, Let's talk about the, movie part of the movie, then. So, here are the movie parts of the movie that are bad all on their own without any help of it being an adaptation. Number 1, the action sequences are dog shit.
Yeah. Both the choreography and the special effects.
And the cinematography.
Yeah.
It looks like the characters are doing a bunch of tumble turns while somebody tied a rope to the camera and swung it around wildly.
Ah!
Good night, Sans.
Night, Sans.
The graphics that constitute a lot of the monsters they're fighting look like dog shit. Al's model looks okay.
Yeah, but apparently they obviously didn't have enough budget for it to do much, because a lot of it was just like kind of just standing around.
Yeah.
There was a part where he was literally just laying down the whole time and not moving.
Right.
And they gave a plot reason for it, but it was still like pretty obvious. The main reason was because they didn't want to deal with that.
Al does a lot of sitting, standing, and lying down. There's like a single scene where he like throws some punches, and that's about as much as you ever get from Al.
Also, just I guess that sort of segues, unless you're still you still want to have more to talk about.
Oh, I mean, I could go on and how bad the fight choreography looks. How it...
Yeah, it's paced weird too.
Yeah.
I mean, I know part of and we can talk about this more later, but part of the problem of making a live action version of an anime is there are a lot of things in anime that look fine because it's animated, where if you do them in live action just like panel for panel, as it were, it looks weird. And part of that is pacing. So with some of the fights, there are parts where, like in the anime, it would have like a dramatic pause where they sort of look at each other or something. And it seems natural, again, in animation, but in the live action it looks kind of funny. And it's the same goes for like, in anime, sometimes they'll make a cool pose or a funny pose or something. And again, because it's stylized, it looks fine. But if you try to do it exactly that way with a real person, it looks silly.
It's true. Also, it doesn't help that, like, a lot of the, actors are real-ass people. But, like, they'll still take, like, anime damage. Like, in the very beginning of the movie. Ed gets like completely pulverized by a big stone pillar.
Yeah.
Thanks to Father Cornello. And like the thing is that in cartoons, cartoon characters,
they can get flung 50 feet and it's fine.
Yeah, you kind of like something about your brain just sort of accepts that they're a lot more hardy than their human counterpart, but when you see like a real life human looking guy get like knocked 70 feet backwards into a wall, the part of your brain that sort of like empathizes with pain is like, oh my god, he's dead.
Yeah. Hey Greta.
Hi.
So another really big thing was that none of the characters retained their personality. Like, a big part of why Fullmetal Alchemist is great is that pretty much all of its characters are well written and three-dimensional. Even, like, side characters who don't play a very large role feel fleshed out. But in this one, they were just kind of there, if they didn't write them out altogether.
I think that they didn't really flesh out any characters, but I think that their adaptation of Hughes was alright.
Yeah, that was pretty much kind of the only one.
It was the best one.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the problem with, like, if you go down the list of all the characters, like, there's just not enough time to really flesh them out.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't really do anything with Al, so, like, a lot...
Yeah, Al especially felt like he was just kind of there.
Yeah.
Which is too bad, since he's, like, one of the main characters. Even Ed, who is the protagonist, felt kind of bland.
He was pretty flat, although I did think they adapted his, like, little, complex about being short to be more appropriate for a live-action adaptation.
Yeah, that's true.
It would have been very silly if he started yelling and waving his arms around in real life.
Yeah.
Instead, he just gives Winry that shut the fuck up stare, which I thought was maybe one of the only funny parts of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like we said earlier, a lot of the issues in the movie stem from the same overarching problem of fitting so much into such a compact 2 hours. Like, even though they didn't, like, thankfully they didn't try to do the entire story, because that'd be impossible. They only did, like, the first story arc, which was maybe 15 episodes or so.
Yeah, 15 episodes.
But that's
only
still,
8 hours of story.
Yeah, that's still so much story. And they had to, like, try to come up with a resolution at the end to tie everything together, which they did not. They kind of kept it open-ended, maybe in the hopes of getting a sequel.
God, I hope so.
But because they crammed so much into such little time, it suffered for it in terms of characters, plot, just emotions, everything.
Yeah, I mean, none of the main emotional beats of Fullmetal Alchemist really came through. There's a lot of parts in that series where, like, characters are built up for a long, slow burn, and then when they finally, like, go off, when there's finally, like, a big character moment, you know, Fullmetal Alchemist does a really good job of making you feel it. But since all the major characters had, like, maybe a few minutes of screen time for you to really get to know them.
You didn't care.
Yeah. But the real baffling thing is that certain other scenes seemed to drag on for far longer than, one, they needed to, and two, they did in the show.
Yeah, the pacing seemed weird.
Like, there was that one dream sequence that Ed had, which was sort of a composite of several scenes in the show.
Yeah.
That seemed to, like, make clear one or two key ideas, but, like, took so long to do that.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know, a lot of the time when that was happening, I was like, okay, wrap it up. Let's go on to the next thing. Moreover, you get the sense that, like, in spite of having tons of stuff to cover, like, really having their work cut out for them, they were stretching stuff out to fill time. Like, between the bad CGI and the budget CGI and sort of like the scenes that went on longer to do nothing, it's really clear that this movie was made on, like, a tight budget.
Yeah.
This movie was made to exist. Hi, Wolf. Wolf Lives Matter, okay?
Hello.
Like, and I think this is further proven by the fact that if you didn't watch Fullmetal Alchemist, you wouldn't know what's happening.
Yeah.
this is one of those adaptations where it's like
they expected you to know the source material.
Yeah.
It seemed. Because while we were watching it, we kept saying to each other, like, if we didn't know the original Fullmetal Alchemist story, this would make no sense.
No one would have any idea what's going on. It's intended to be consumed by people who've watched the anime. And you might as well just, like, you would get the same effect. As far as I could tell, I would have rather instead looked at several pictures of Fullmetal Alchemist cosplay, and I would have been equally as satisfied.
Yeah.
Like, because I don't understand what else other people are gonna get out of it besides...
Yeah, also, like, a lot of... Like you said, a lot of parts kind of dragged on, but also a lot of parts were way too fast. And sometimes they cut out things altogether and just got straight to the big moment, and then not only did it not impact you because you didn't have the build-up, but it didn't really make sense narratively.
None of it made sense narratively, dude.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, let's sort of jump back before we start talking about the story. Is there any other, like, cinematography or, like, story structure stuff we can go into before we start saying about how its story makes no sense and here's why?
I guess, real quick, we could discuss, so for anyone who doesn't know, it was a Japanese production.
Okay,
so...
Christy doesn't care about spoilers anymore.
Okay. We were actually if you left, we were actually trying to say some things that weren't spoilery.
Yeah.
It was a Japanese production, which might tie into what I was talking about with, because I haven't really seen a whole lot of live action adaptations of anime, but the ones I have seen are mostly Japanese. And then I also haven't seen a lot of J-dramas that are just original and not based on anime. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it's maybe just a acting stylistic thing in Japan, and just doesn't really translate well to Western, if you're used to Western acting. But I think that tied in a lot to what I was saying earlier about how certain, like, poses or jokes or whatever don't necessarily translate to live action very well. Because I have come across that in other adaptations. Like in the Ace Attorney movie, which is also a Japanese production. There, you know how in anime sometimes if someone makes a really bad joke, everyone will, like, fall down?
Yeah.
They did that, and with real people it looked so weird.
Yeah. From, like, what I understand...
But again, I don't know if it's just a cultural thing or what.
I don't know if it's a cultural thing necessarily, because from what I understand, the Ace Attorney live-action movie is supposed to be a little bit, like, self-aware and a little bit campy.
Yeah, it definitely is. Although it's another adaptation that's kind of just a little boring, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that, like, my background in terms of, like, live-action Japanese movies kind of only exists in a narrow space of, like, I've seen a couple of Godzilla movies, and I've seen a couple of, like, samurai movies. And I mean, they like, do pose, but it's not, like, the same as what I'd consider, like, anime posing.
Right.
Like, the sort of confrontational body language they use in, like, samurai movies is a lot more evocative of maybe, like, a Western, when they, like, sort of stare each other down. In Fullmetal Alchemist and in other anime movies, it's a lot more like, this was an anime at one point, guys.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, I guess at least we don't have to complain about whitewashing. Although it's a little ironic since Fullmetal Alchemist, unlike a lot of anime, does actually take place in a Western setting. So technically the characters could be described as white, most of them.
Yeah.
But, again, whatever.
It's not a big deal.
Nah.
Like I said, I think it would have been funny if they were white, but they still had to speak Japanese.
At least then it would have probably been entertaining.
So let's get into the plot. Plot's
Okay,
bad.
Spoiler alert now.
It's spoilers. So the movie starts out not dissimilar to, I guess, the anime in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
So the anime starts out, I believe, in both anime versions with them in Lior.
Yes.
And then it like gets into the backstory a
Yeah.
little bit after that.
Yeah.
This sort of jumps straight into when they're kids and their mother expires, and then they try and bring her back. And this happens like very quickly.
Yeah, it happens in like 2 minutes.
Obviously,
She like kind of just collapses.
it's a 2-hour movie. They don't have a ton of time to go into like how the father left and like the mother was like depressed and sick for a long time until she eventually collapsed and fell deathly ill and died.
And how they learned alchemy to make her happy.
How they learned alchemy to make her happy, and then how they like
Because it reminded her of their dad.
spent all this time after she died like mastering alchemy. And
Yeah, it completely skipped over them training with Izumi Curtis. They basically just like, she died and they immediately tried human transmutation.
yeah,
They were like, didn't age them up at all.
they didn't age them up. There was like
Like, it would have been one thing if they just skipped the training but had new, slightly older actors to show a time skip, but it was the same actors.
their like whole like the whole buildup is like and this is not an exaggeration. This is like basically a play-by-play of what happens. The mom dies. They are at the funeral. They are in a library talking about human transmutation. They are in the basement doing human transmutation. That is not. It
Yeah.
takes about that long to get the backstory going.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing, like we were talking about in terms of adaptation, it does this weird thing where it, both visually and in terms of dialogue, it takes some stuff from the anime and manga, like word for word. Like, obviously I can't say if it's exactly word for word because I don't speak Japanese, but looking at just the subtitles, there were a lot of lines, including when they're at her grave saying like, when Al says, "I'm hungry and cold" and stuff like that, that did, from what I remember, seem exact. So it did have this weird mesh of like, some scenes were exactly like the original and others were completely off.
Yeah.
And because they tried to cobble them together, it didn't always work.
Right. Yeah, they really tried to just smush everything together. So now the kicker, the really like part that's fucked is that as someone who's watched the anime, I know what happens, but from a totally like removed point of view, what happens after they bring their mother back to life seems like Al gets whisked away into a tornado.
They changed that. Yeah. If you haven't watched or read Fullmetal Alchemist, in the original, they use alchemy, which is this magic science stuff, and is like the sort of the premise of a lot of what's going on. And they're both prodigies and stuff, and they try to use it to bring their mother back from the dead. And by doing so, but that's forbidden because if you do human transmutation, well, it's taboo.
It's taboo, and also there's like a big principle throughout
Yeah.
the series is that in order to get something, you have to give something
Yeah.
of equal value
Equivalent
up.
exchange is like the main rule of alchemy.
So to gain a human life, one would infer you have to give a human life, which these children obviously didn't kill nobody.
Yeah, they thought that if they just, because she was their mother, they had the same genetic makeup, so they thought they could just use that in terms of just pure science. They were obviously wrong.
Yeah, they drop a little bit of blood into the sort of spell circle.
Anyway, so in the original, when they try to do that, shit gets all fucked up, and they open this gate up, which becomes a big thing later, because at first they don't really know what it is. And then like these evil little black hands show up and drag Al, the younger brother, into the gate, and they take Ed's leg in Al's whole body, and Ed's freaking out, so he uses more alchemy to get Al's soul back and bind it to a suit of armor. But it's very obvious what happened, because he gets dragged into the weird evil gate thing.
Yeah, when you're first watching the cartoon... When you're first watching the anime and you see it happen, it's like a little mysterious. You obviously don't know about what the gate is. You just know that they've committed a taboo and like some sort of like cosmic justice is happening where they're taking away, where they're dragging Ed's leg and Al's entire body into some sort of ethereal gate.
Yeah.
And then Al sacrifices Ed sacrifices his arm to bind Al's soul to a suit of armor. Essentially, Al now possesses the suit of armor and uses it to walk and interact with stuff. In
the movie,
they don't do any of that shit.
Yeah, in the movie, there's this giant tornado thing, and the house is like getting torn apart and shit, and then part of the floor breaks off, carrying Al away with it. Yeah,
it's very visually confusing. It seems like maybe
he just went to Oz.
Yeah, he was swept up by a tornado. But you know that's not true, because in the very next scene, you see Ed in older Ed in an entirely again, if you haven't seen Fullmetal Alchemist, you might be so confused because you'd be like, who is this bejacketed young man who's chasing this priest around this town in Italy? But
I mean, I feel like you could probably infer that it's a time skip. And
could you?
Because that's not an uncommon mechanic, like that the character is a child and something happens, and then flash forward and suddenly now there's a new older character, and you could probably figure that it's the same character.
Did they have any text though that said 5 years later? Did they like use any sort of visual storytelling hint to say that was still Ed? I feel like the only hint you might have is that the Japanese people aren't usually blonde, and both this child and this young man are blonde.
Yeah.
Might be your best hint. Regardless, I mean, you do eventually figure out it's Ed, whether or not it takes you a minute or not. You find out it's Ed, but...
Like, they do call him by name and everything.
Well, not for a while.
Not for a while, no.
Not until you see a giant suit of armor call him Ed. Which, again, not having watched the anime, you might be a little confused about who the fuck the suit of armor might be. Yeah. Eventually, Ed does call him Al, so that gets sorted out. Anyway, the whole part in Lior is totally goofy.
Yeah, they basically just cut immediately to them confronting Father Cornello. There's none of the stuff at the beginning.
There's none of like the sort of
Rose is not there.
Subtext or subtlety or like...
There's none of them meeting the people and finding out about Cornello's religious scam.
Yeah,
He's just immediately fighting Father Cornello and is like, you got the Philosopher's Stone and you're using it for bad things, rah, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, all the stuff that makes... that episode good are just cut out. It's just like he's fighting this priest. This priest has the Philosopher's Stone, and it turns out this priest is an asshole because he takes a hostage.
Yeah.
And like,
and Ed's all like, you were deceiving the people, and all the people just believe him. I guess because
just chill.
I guess you could argue that it's because he suddenly took a girl hostage that maybe people would be more willing to believe Ed, but it's still dumb.
It's one of those things that adaptations do where they've expected everybody to be familiar with the source material.
Yeah.
Where they just sort of put stuff that is in the source material together, and the viewer is sort of expected to fill in the blanks, which is bad job. Again, I think like another reason why this shouldn't have been a film, it should have been a series of photographs of cosplay. So that's it. The military comes in and sort of, I guess, apprehends, or they don't actually apprehend.
They're all just in Lior for some reason.
Father Cornello.
Yeah, he gets away.
There's this fucking ridiculous part where like 4 soldiers have him surrounded and like are grabbing him, and while Colonel Mustang is reprimanding Ed, Father Cornello just like handily breaks free of
and runs away.
Yeah, these 4 trained soldiers and like just pieces out, and they like
don't try to shoot at him.
Slowly react to chase him.
Oh, another thing that's minor but hilarious is when
welcome back, ex-boy.
Welcome back. When Father Cornello is running from Ed at the beginning of the movie, well, not when they get to that part. He's like not even running. He's sort of lightly jogging.
Yeah,
it's kind of hilarious.
So it moves forward in time a little bit to where he's going back to this East City. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is like...
Oh yeah, and Winry is there.
Yeah, Winry shows up.
They gave Winry a way bigger role. And I kind of understand why, because since they're only doing the first part, she doesn't have a huge role until later on in the series. Mm-hmm. And they probably wanted to give her screen time, especially... And they sort of gave her Al's role for part of the time, because I guess they didn't want to...
Animate Al.
There's this whole part where Ed goes somewhere else, and in the original, Al was with him, but in this one, Winry was. But it's still kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because she's there, but she doesn't really do anything.
She looks upset a lot.
And it's too bad, because, again, Fullmetal Alchemist has great characters. Winry herself is a great character. And if they gave her more screen time and kept her personality and stuff, then I wouldn't have a complaint about it, but they don't. She's just sort of there for no reason, it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like they were trying to make her, like, take on the role of, like, how Al is sort of the, empathetic voice of reason, always trying to, like, be diplomatic and understand where people are coming from.
Yeah.
It seems like they tried to have Winry do that, but honestly, most of the time Winry does anything, it's just like her listening to someone and then like sort of frowning.
Yeah.
Which, it's not good.
Nope.
I think that goes without saying.
Yeah.
So they get back to East and they introduce a bunch of people. They reintroduce Colonel Mustang, they introduced Riza Hawkeye, and all these...
also took her personality and everything, and she didn't do anything.
All these characters they introduce are like just sort of flash-by introductions, where it's like, and here's, remember Riza? She's here too, wow! And the studio audience claps. It's really just sort of like a cavalcade of, do you remember this character? Well, they're here too.
Yep.
Sadly, there's no Louis Armstrong.
Nope.
Which is really too bad.
They cut out most characters.
Most characters aren't there. But, like, I was really mostly disappointed that Louis Armstrong wasn't there just because I wanted to see them try and make a physical representation of him.
Had to get a bodybuilder.
Yeah. A bodybuilder with a tiny mustache and a single strand of hair. So...
Yeah, they cut out so many characters. They cut out Armstrong, they cut out Izumi Curtis, and her husband. Half of, like... Mustang only had Hawkeye and Hughes, and, like, none of his other underlings were there.
I mean, to be fair, Izumi...
Which they don't really... need to be there since they didn't do the whole story, but it was still kind of like you couldn't even have some actors just sort of in the background that vaguely look like them.
As far as it goes in the story, though, they didn't really get to the part with Izumi Curtis anyway.
True.
I mean, there's like plenty of characters who like.
I was just reiterating her because we were talking about how they skipped over her training and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the CGI is pretty bad. Like I said...
You could tell they didn't have a huge budget.
Al's CGI looks good, but it doesn't move.
Yeah.
Like, they spent a lot of time, like, I guess, rigging up a good model of Al, but, like, the time and resources that would go into like using it for very much were probably outside of their budget. Outside of that, like everything kind of looks like shit.
The costumes were all right.
Those aren't CGI.
No, I know.
I mean, the production was okay outside of the CGI. You're right, the costumes looked good and accurate, and you know, everybody kind of looked like they were wearing what they were supposed to be wearing. I mean, I don't know. The cinematography for the fights were like the really standout, god-awful things.
Yeah, the cinematography overall was just kind of normal.
Yeah, it was like competent. It wasn't like anything to write home about.
Although there was one cut that was really weird, where I don't exactly remember when it was, but it was, I think, when Hughes got Lust in the forehead with his knife, and she was like slumped against the wall, and she says a thing, and it's like a close-up of her face, and then it jumps out to like a mid close-up, which you're not supposed to do. You don't want to go from like a close-up to a mid. You would want to go from a close-up to like a wide shot, because otherwise it just kind of looks like a jump cut. So that looked weird.
Also, it's worth mentioning that the Foley was dog shit.
The Foley was not good.
The Foley, for those of you who don't know, are like the sort of sound effects they add in the in post to make.
Yeah, which is more than you'd think if you're not familiar with the concept. Even like footsteps and if someone's like crinkling a newspaper or something, they have to do that in post.
Yeah, it's important to like give scenes, like make them feel like they exist in space instead of like on a screen. So the Foley is bad. There's a lot of times where like Ed will like slam a desk or punch a wall, and like we all have punched walls and slammed desks, and in real life, you know, it might not be that loud, but in a movie it's supposed to be very impactful because it needs to give you an idea of like the atmosphere and the sort of like presence of a situation. But like a lot of the smacking is like Ed would punch a wall and it would sound like it was very weak. There's a lot of like weird Foley that also feels just like out of place. There's this really extended part that was driving me insane where this character, Dr. Marco, has a bag full of ice and he's constantly moving it around his head, and it sounds like a fucking empty soup can full of marbles and not like a bag of ice at all.
Yeah.
Was just really bizarre.
There was also a part, like, sometimes the footsteps sounded okay, but sometimes they sounded like they were walking in a completely different place and on completely different materials.
People were constantly getting stabbed and sliced and pierced all over the place in that movie. But, like, a lot of times in movies when, like, people, like, suffer, you know, lacerations and piercing, there's, like, a really heavy and chunky and, like, viscera sound to it. But like a lot of times people get stabbed and it would just be like and like sound like shit.
Maybe they were trying to go for more realistic sound, but you would think would be good, but it's really not.
Yeah, it's never go for realistic sounds in Foley. Like real life sounds don't sound real.
Yeah.
As counterintuitive as that may be, it's like Foley is such a weird and abstract thing. It's in some ways it's like kind of more of a feeling than like a recreation.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where like if you do good Foley, it's this thing that nobody really notices, but if you do bad Foley, then everyone notices.
Right. Anyway, Brainy City, they introduce all the characters, and then like they go on to be like, you're gonna be living with Shao Tucker, and this is like, if you've watched the anime, this is a big deal because like Shao Tucker is kind of like the first story arc in the anime where like shit gets really real.
Yeah.
Like sort of the central themes of the entire anime start to rear their ugly head. It's a big deal. It's like very, I don't know, it's like
sort of the first big like time Ed since obviously their human transmutation thing that they sort of reiterate how horrible alchemy can be.
Yeah, Ed has to reckon with the consequences of the power he's been pursuing for the last, like, 5 or so years because of, like, the things that transpire in Shao Tucker's lab. But this part is, like all the other parts, not really given enough time to really stew and get that emotional payoff.
Yeah.
Essentially, Shao Tucker is like, look at my cool experiments, and Ed's like, wow, cool experiments.
Yeah.
Can you help my brother? And he's like, I don't know, maybe. Also, in the
a lot of, in the anime and manga, a lot of that time was dedicated to showing Nina and Alexander, who were Shao Tucker's little daughter, who's like 4 or 5, and their dog. Mm-hmm. And like, there's this whole montage, which probably wouldn't have been that hard to do, of like Ed and Al studying and stuff with Shao Tucker, but also in between that, taking time to get to know Nina and playing with her and Alexander and sort of forming this relationship with them. And then that's why it's really gut-wrenching when you find out that his experiments were like human experiments and he turns Nina and Alexander into a chimera, and it's like really like, oh shit. Whereas this time you didn't have any of that buildup, so when it happens you're just kind of like, oh, that sucks.
That's gross. Mario Kart Monday's ending X-Boy 360 because it's not as lively as it used to be.
Yeah, it's a combination of less, I guess, participation both in the stream and in the actual game.
Yeah.
As you can see, there are fewer people playing now.
Bye, Arlen.
Bye, Arlen. And also, the last few episodes, we've had less viewers, and also, we've had less stuff to talk about. I mean, maybe in the future, if something happens that we really want to rant about, we might have a random episode. But for the most part, we're not going to have any more scheduled episodes.
Yeah. By the way, just a quick aside, also during the Shao Tucker part of the movie, this is when they dive back into Ed's backstory and explain the circumstances under which Al is created, or rather how his soul is bound to that armor. It's a composite scene of like when Al first sees the door, and also when Al gives his arm when Ed gives his arm in order to bind Al to the suit of armor. Now, again, if you've seen the anime, this makes perfect sense. It's easy to follow what's happening. Well, sort of. This all takes place in a dream sequence, which is a little bit jarring, but whatever. This all makes sense and you understand what's happening, but if perchance you haven't seen the anime, what's happening seems very disorienting because, like, they have established sort of what happened when they were kids in the beginning of the movie. Then they had at this point maybe 20 minutes of actual plot, and now they're going back and sort of finishing this plot thread that they started at the beginning of the movie, except the characters aren't kids anymore. Now they're just aged up. So essentially, the movie drops the plot thread when you have these child actors trying to do transmutation, and then picks it back up with real adult Ed doing what he did as a child.
Yeah. And like, you can understand why they did that, because sure, they could argue like, oh, it's just a dream, so it makes sense that he's not a kid, he's his own self doing what he did as a kid, but it's still visually confusing.
It's visual, yeah.
And it's I lost my train of thought. As we said, we were drinking while watching this. What was I saying?
You were saying how the thing is visually confusing, yes. And it's like...
Oh, and they probably also wanted to do that because it is more like an emotional scene. So they probably wanted to get the older actor to be able to emote, as opposed to the child actor. Which, as from a filmmaking's perspective, I can understand that. But again, from a viewer's perspective, it wasn't a very good decision.
It's hard for me to understand as an armchair fake filmmaker why they didn't just have it in the beginning they were kids and then do a quick little montage where they age up to their current ages and then perform the transmutation so that they could have the emotional element and also it could sort of like be gel into like an easy to follow narrative moment. But that's just me. What do I know?
Also, X-Boy, I don't think we're probably not planning on doing a specific thing to replace Mario Kart Monday. We'll probably just use the time to do more streams of other games.
Unless like a really spicy online multiplayer game comes out,
Yeah.
we're probably just gonna like play other games. Like Chelsea said.
Just reiterating.
Also, another thing of note during the Shao Tucker bit, a couple things. One, in order to sort of condense the storyline, Ed and Winry get sent off to find Dr. Marco, which we'll get to that in a minute. And also, for reasons unknown, for motivations I didn't understand, Shao Tucker starts talking about how his memories might be fake and he might be an artificial life form or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what Shao Tucker had to gain from that.
Yeah, like in the original, a different character does that.
A different character does that because and it makes sense because that character is trying to gain the upper hand on Ed and Al.
Yeah.
Because they're in direct confrontation. Here, in the movie, Shao Tucker is seemingly treating Al or experimenting on him, and there's no conflict. Shao Tucker is just trying to sow the seeds of paranoia for seemingly no reason.
Like, I guess, to play devil's advocate, you could try to make the argument that it was just because he, like, wants to experiment and shit, but that still doesn't really hold up.
Yeah, no, it's a weak reason.
Yeah.
When Ed and Winry go see Dr. Marco, it starts off like sort of like how it happens in the anime. Dr. Marco doesn't want to talk to them. He's being very reclusive. And then they convince him to talk. But decidedly different.
Ah, shit.
In the show is that Dr. Marco tries 2 times to kill them with a gun. And also Dr. Marco gets killed by the homunculus lust.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. So Dr. Marco just kind of dies within 10 minutes of being introduced. And basically all he exists to do is to give a Philosopher's Stone to Ed and tell him about Lab 5. Which moves the plot along. Honestly, that's really more of an adaptational problem than a movie problem. Because if you're just watching it without knowing the anime, probably seeing this doctor die and give that piece of advice doesn't really confuse you.
Yeah. Another side note that is related is they completely wrote out Scar.
Yeah, no Scar.
Which, I guess, if they're not going to make a sequel or anything, makes sense, since he's not, like, he's important, but he doesn't really get involved with the overall plot until much later on. So, I can understand why they wrote him out. And it's related because a lot of Dr. Marco's involvement in the plot later on directly ties into Scar.
Right.
So, getting rid of them, if they're not planning on making a sequel or anything, I can understand, I guess.
I think that you have to have either both or none, because there are character development is so dependent on one another. So I think, aside from the fact that Dr. Marco, like all the other characters, are reduced down to the most base elements, I didn't really miss Dr. Marco's
Yeah.
exclusion from the movie. Or not exclusion, but like quick death.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Ed gets back to Shao Tucker's place, and that's when the whole Nina tragedy happens. The chimera that they graphicsed onto the screen is a faithful visual representation of Nina from the anime, but I mean, it like doesn't move, and it's like barely in it. And here's the problem, is that since it doesn't really move or do anything, it doesn't feel alive. And in order to feel like sort of empathy for this twisted creature, it has to move and feel like a real thing that exists instead of like a fucking Chuck E. Cheese animatronic. So, again, a lot of the emotional impact of the fate of Nina and Alexander is not only lost by the lack of backstory, but also by the total, like, how much, like, the CGI is skimped on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, and then Shao Tucker gets arrested. And, the main characters are, like, grieving and sad, and then Roy Mustang is like, hey, stop being so sad. Yeah, I'll give you something to cry about, bitch. Like, honestly, Roy Mustang's character is not spared the dog shit bastardization of all the other characters, so...
Yeah. I mean, he does say that to Ed in the original, but it's a lot more, like...
The subtleties are lost in translation, huh?
Yeah. Like, they sort of took what he literally said and just made it, instead of making his speech sound more inspirational of like, hey, yeah, bad shit happens, but we have to keep moving on to prevent more bad shit from happening, it sort of just sounds like he's just being a jerk.
Get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. What happens next? So, like, I kind of lost the plot thread after that scene, because, like, the next scene is that Ed's in a library studying.
Well, it's because he's looking for Lab 5.
Okay, he's looking for Lab 5, and Hughes comes in to try and help him, and that scene is actually not so bad, because Hughes is, like, the only kind of okay thing in this whole movie. Like, he's written...
Like, he's still definitely way watered down, but he's such a good character in the original that even watered down, he's still a decent character.
He's still good, and I liked the actor that portrayed him.
Yeah. They got an actor that looked quite a bit like him and also did a good job in terms of acting.
Anyway, they sort of, like, put it together, and then Al and Ed go to the cannery that they think it's at, and that's when the big thing happens where Al confronts Ed that he might have had his memories implanted or modified or, like, fabricated or something like that. And then Al's model sees the most CGI use of the whole movie when he fights Ed. It's really fucking badly choreographed. This is like maybe one of the most important fights of the series because it's very emotionally charged. It's like one of the few character moments that happens in this movie, and it's like it feels like it's being filmed by, like, the same guy who filmed the Blair Witch Project. If that guy took a bunch of meth and caffeine pills, like, the camera's shaking and flipping and flying all around.
Like the first Hunger Games.
Yeah, and again, it's really transparent that this is happening so that, like, they don't have to do a good job of, like, animating Al's model. Like, they can sort of, like, blur everything around and make it look like dog shit. And basically all they're fighting, like, there's no fight choreography. They just punch each other's face a lot.
Yeah. Like, if you have never watched or read Fullmetal Alchemist, more so watch, since it's an action thing. But the fights in Fullmetal Alchemist are really cool.
They're cool and good.
they're well choreographed, and it's unlike some action anime. In Fullmetal Alchemist, almost all the fights are like emotional and relevant, I guess.
Yeah, it's really clear why
Yeah.
they're fighting.
So, like, again, Fullmetal Alchemist is super good, and for a lot of different reasons, and one of those is that it is an action series. Although it does also have a lot of other genres, which we can talk about more later. But
The action is informed by the drama
yeah,
in a lot of it,
Exactly.
which is great.
sorry, I'm not super coherent right now. But yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Whereas in this one, it kind of felt like they're just
The like action
Doing it.
scenes, yeah, it was like arbitrary. It's
Yeah.
like the script writers were like, "Oh, there's supposed to be a fight here. Well, I guess let's have a fight then." Anyway,
and like and the music also was like very clearly trying to get you
to have emotions.
to care about this fight. That it's a big character moment. The two brothers who love each other to the point of codependency are having this conflict. Don't you feel sad about it?
And it's like, no, I don't feel sad.
The only one who feels sad is Winry, who's kind of just standing there crying.
He's doing the Winry thing where she like grimaces a lot and is like, please stop. And that's how this
Yeah.
ends, is that
And it's also another scene like we were talking about earlier that kind of just gets dragged out way more than it has to be.
it's so
Like
long.
in the original, in both the manga and the anime, for that scene, I think it takes place very quickly. They have Al confronts Ed, and they do have a little bit of a fight, but it gets resolved very quickly with Ed and especially Winry being like, "No, you're being dumb right now, letting that guy manipulate you," and it's over very fast. Whereas
Yeah.
this one, they fight for like quite a while. Then Winry does talk to Al about it like she does in the original, but instead of being just like angry at him for being stupid, in this one she's like really crying and emotional, like sad about it. And her speech goes on for way longer than it did in the original.
The problem with this adaptation is that it's trying to take these moments that were good because of like, you know,
Build up.
all this build up over several episodes and like instead put everything in the climax
Yeah.
of a certain like character arc.
And that's not good storytelling.
Yeah.
If you don't have that build up, then you don't care no matter how big the emotional bit is.
I can't like get invested in a character and have the build up and the payoff all within the span of like just the climax of an idea. And then the cannery thing happens, and then we cut back to Myers Hughes, who like figures out the secret of the labs, and he figures out that all of the land is a big transmutation circle, and then the center where Lab 5 is supposed to be is where the real Lab 5 is.
Yeah.
It's a POW prison, a prisoner of war prison,
Yeah.
if you
And
will.
that bit is, for the most part, fairly accurate.
Yeah, that's all accurate. And at that point, he gets caught by the homunculi, who they kill him. And it's like in the anime, it's fucking
Yeah.
devastating
Yeah.
when Hughes
Hughes is-
dies.
It's not an exaggeration to say Mays Hughes' death is possibly one of, if not the most, like, traumatic deaths in anime.
Saddest anime death.
Yeah. And not only that, not only, like, in that moment is it devastating, but the way that the story is made out, you experience that grief, like, 4 times within the same version of the story.
Yeah.
Because Ed, Al, and Winry all go their separate ways right before that happens. And they say goodbye to Hughes beforehand. And Hughes is like, oh yeah, I'll help you figure out the thing about Lab 5. And they're all happy and stuff, and they go their separate ways. And then Hughes gets murdered, and then Ed and Al and Winry don't know about it for a really long time. So you get the grief when it happens, Then they have his funeral, and Roy Mustang is like devastated because it's his best friend. So you feel sad at that part. Then Ed and Al I don't remember who finds out first, Ed and Al or Winry. But either way, you still feel that pain when they find out because they then are devastated. And then when the next one finds out, Ed or Winry, I don't remember which one. I don't remember the order, but that's 4 times in one series. And then if you're like me and you've like, I read the manga, watched the original anime, and watched Brotherhood, so that's like Maze Hugh's death has got me so many times, and this is the first time where I didn't feel anything.
Right, yeah, I watched when he dies in the live action movie, I'm like, okay.
Like, even in Conqueror of Shambhala, when Hughes came back and was a Nazi, I was like, Hughes! But in this one, I was just like, kind of sad that the only good character is gone, but
yeah,
I'm not nearly as emotionally wrecked as any of the previous versions of Fullmetal Alchemist where that happened.
You're not wrecked because Fullmetal Alchemist takes so much time to spend with Hughes and establishes him as like a real living character with very important relationships to other real living characters. And when he's suddenly taken out of the equation, it's like a gigantic black hole forms in the middle of this web of relationships and people. Yeah,
and as a character, he's like one of the best characters.
Yeah.
Just as an individual.
So in this movie, the most like time he spends is like he's got like a little bit of time with Roy Mustang to establish their friendship, and you spend a little bit of time with his family, like they have dinner with him, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And it's like not enough time to. It's not enough build up for the emotional payoff they're trying to get. And I mean that's really the theme of this entire movie, is that even though Fullmetal Alchemist is a very action heavy story, what makes it so good is all the emotional build-up and payoff throughout the fucking, like, 50 some odd episodes of anime that exist within it.
Yeah.
Every episode is good in and of itself of the anime because of, like, the world building and the character building and the, like, action sequences. But if that's all it was, it would just be, like, a good anime. The fact that, like, there's so much painstaking care put into making it a large, overarching series that just...
Yeah, I mean, unlike a lot of other, like, famous, well-known shonen anime, like, I don't know, Bleach or Naruto or those types, those which have a lot of, like, filler and Monster of the Week type things, Fullmetal Alchemist has almost zero filler. Pretty much every single episode or chapter has a specific purpose, be it for plot or character, or usually both.
Yeah.
It's very well done.
Everything's like very purposeful and built out to be like, to all like converge on singular, you know, narrative ideas. And it's very effective. That's what makes it so good. And when you try and condense that all down to like just the climax of the narrative idea, you have like climax of idea after climax, like a play-by-play, a slideshow of the most important parts of Fullmetal Alchemist. It's like, who cares? I don't care anymore.
Yep.
And that's it. That's what this movie was. It was a slideshow of all the important parts of like the first third of Fullmetal Alchemist. And it's totally meaningless.
Yep.
And it's really boring. They go to Lab 5 anyway. There's like this whole thing where like...
Yeah, this is when they kind of start taking things that happen later in the series and combining them.
Yeah.
Like with the... Mustang's confrontation with lust and envy, which doesn't happen until much later in the story. And then the biggest thing with like the weird zombie guys, those don't show up till the end of the series.
Yeah.
And don't really make sense because you don't have any of the context for why they exist anymore. Like again, Fullmetal Alchemist, the plot is very carefully told and unraveled throughout several episodes or chapters. so that when you get to that part, it's all like, oh shit, there was this whole conspiracy over hundreds of years and blah blah blah. And whereas now it's just sort of like, there are a bunch of zombie Philosopher's Stone guys in this place. Yep.
Yeah, but they take care of it. And then...
But yeah, that's another thing. Like, when they have those zombie guys in the original, it's a big deal. There's a huge battle and shit. Because it's like hundreds of basically alchemical zombies. But I guess a squad of guys with guns is good enough.
Yeah, they just shoot them all off camera. They like...
Just shoot them in the head, everybody.
Yeah, it's like
cool.
Totally...
We got it. We got this.
That's so bad.
Didn't need any alchemy either. Like, in that big battle in the original, you had all the cool characters you met that Ed and Al met over all their travels, like the Armstrongs and Greed and his guys, and like the human chimeras who were good, and like Mustang's group that had gotten separated. And like, just it's a great climax because it's all these different characters that you met over the series over a really long period of time sort of all come together, and it's really good. But, you know, a squad of normal human soldiers plus Hawkeye probably take care of that. They should have just done that.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's terrible. I mean... At the end, the sort of end of the movie is that they have the Philosopher's Stone, and now, seemingly, if we follow just sort of the plot structure of the movie, Ed should be able to restore Al's body, which he like starts to do, and then he decides not to because it's not right to use a life. And that motive, that sort of parable, or moral of the story made a lot of sense at that point because of all the themes that have been established about like the morality of using alchemy for different tasks. But since that doesn't really happen in this adaptation, then it's kind of like, why didn't Ed do it?
Yeah, honestly, when that started to happen, I went through like this phase of, at first I was like, wait, is Ed actually gonna do it? That goes against everything they sort of stand for in the original. And then he decides not to, and I'm like, oh, well, okay, at least goes with the original, but now it's like, that would have been an easy way to wrap up the story. Yeah, it wouldn't have, like, the moral implications, like you said, they don't establish it in this one, so it wouldn't have been a big deal.
Yeah, it's like, just fix Al, who cares?
Like, in the manga and anime, Ed and Al would once they decide. Sorry, I can't. I'm both enraged and a little drunk. In the original, once Ed and Al, fairly early on in the series, find out that Philosopher's Stones are made out of human lives, they immediately are like, well, we're gonna find another way to get our bodies back because we don't want to use people's lives, even if it's like already. Even if they find a Philosopher's Stone that's been already made and the people are already dead, they still don't want to use that. So it's a big deal, and again, it happens fairly early on, so it's sort of a recurring theme because as the series goes on, there are times where Ed does find a real Philosopher's Stone, and he does sort of have that moment of like, do I use it, or is it wrong? And it happens like a couple of times, and he always says like, no, it is wrong, we shouldn't use human lives. So Canon, I'm gonna call him Canon Ed, would never use a Philosopher's Stone. The only time he ever uses a Philosopher's Stone is when he uses his own, because he figures out that Philosopher's Stones are basically human souls, and that therefore your own soul can be used as a Philosopher's Stone, but it'll like take some years off your life. But he does use his own at one point. But Canon Ed would like never use a Philosopher's Stone made of other people. But again, like we just said, in this one they never establish any of that shit.
Yeah.
So if the movie had ended with him being like, oh, I found a Philosopher's Stone, it was just inside the homunculi the whole time, then it would have been like, okay, cool,
Yeah.
movie over.
For what it's worth, it's like barely touched on, because there's this whole like bit near the climax where Shao Tucker comes back. By the way, Shao Tucker just magically escapes the police, and it's never explained how or why.
No, it did explain that Hokuro did that
Oh, okay.
because he wanted Tucker to figure out the Philosopher's Stone or whatever.
Tucker gets released by the government because the government's secretly evil.
Yeah. That actually is
Which
canon.
is canon. But Shao Tucker comes back and he has this whole thing, this whole like very trite sort of minute where he's like, "We're not so different, you and I, Edric." Trying to like equivocate, you know, his human chimera experiments with Ed's pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. But like again, so much of the gravity is lost in that equivalence just because like the consequences of people's actions don't feel like they matter in this highly condensed version of Fullmetal Alchemist. So it's like,
Yeah, like in the original when Shao Tucker says that and compares the two of them, that's when Ed loses his shit and almost kills him. And it makes sense because all the build-up and the moral implications and of what he's doing and everything. Whereas in this one, it's kind of just like...
I don't know, man. In this one, it's really just like Shao Tucker would say all that shit, and then it would smash cut to like Jeff Bridges saying, "Well, that's just like your opinion, man."
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's pretty much it. It's none of that movie is any good. Just the real shame is that it's also boring.
Yeah.
If it was at least like hilariously bad, like how hilariously bad Death Note adaptation was, then I might recommend it ironically. But I don't recommend it in any capacity. Don't watch it if you like Fullmetal Alchemist.
It was a lot like The Last Airbender in that it was a bad adaptation and also a bad movie on its own and just kind of dull.
Yeah, I'd say comparing it to Last Airbender is pretty fair. It's just... If, Last Airbender is on this side of the spectrum, and the live-action Super Mario movie is on this end of the spectrum, it's definitely way over in Airbender territory. Any final thoughts on the debacle that was the Fullmetal Alchemist movie?
Oh, another thing that they changed that was, again, it was a thing where it was like very impactful in the original and now it was just kind of there. Oh, but not only that, it's kind of along the same lines as if they had Ed use the stone, where it would have been like, okay, because the movie's over now, it's whatever, but the canon Ed would never do that. In a similar situation was when Roy kills Envy. So to give a little context, in the original, Maze Hughes, top 10 anime deaths, Roy's best friend, is killed by Envy, who's a shapeshifter who disguises himself as Hughes' wife. Roy spends a lot of his time trying to figure out who killed Hughes to avenge him. At first he thought it was lust, then he finds out it's Envy, and he like loses his shit because he's like later on in the series he's spent most of the series trying to find out who Hughes' killer is so that he can kill them. It's a very, very large part of his character. And then when the final confrontation actually happens and he like burns the shit out of Envy, but then Ed stops him from actually killing him because, you know, it's that whole moral thing, like if you kill him in cold blood, it won't change anything and you'll just be a cold-blooded killer, blah, blah, blah. And Roy does actually listen to him, because Ed basically says, like, this isn't really what Hughes would want and stuff. And that's sort of how Roy gets closure from that, is by not killing Envy. And then Envy, because that would let Envy win, because Envy basically kind of baits him into trying to kill him. So then when he doesn't kill him, Envy kills himself. And which is also a big part of Envy's character, which I'm not going to go into, but it's a whole thing, because like I said, all the characters are very fleshed out and have like whole backstories and everything. Anyway, so Envy kills himself, and it's actually like quite satisfying. Whereas in this version, I understand, because, you know, it's condensed and you don't have any of that backstory with Envy or anything, but I still have mixed feelings about Roy does just straight up kill him. So it's another one of those things where it's like, I guess in this version I don't really care, but in canon Roy would not have done that. Like, that's not how it went down at all. And it's another, I guess it's a moment, unlike what we were saying, where it's the moments where it is loyal to it but has no impact. It was sort of the other way around, where that was very much not how that happened, and still, but it didn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to pick which way it should go down, I think that, like, it would have made too little sense if Roy didn't kill Envy in this movie's context. So as glad as I could be that it went down the way it did, but, like, that's only because, like, the homunculus, in spite of the movie trying to have its cake and eat it too, are pretty much just presented as, like, bad guy monsters. Yeah. Like, at the end, when Roy is burning Lust to death, Lust does this thing where it's like I'm a human. And, like, suddenly we're supposed to, like, feel this deep pathos. Yeah. When, in fact, it's like, or not pathos, pathos, whatever, for, like, Lust, but it's like, same deal. None of that stuff's been, like, built up or alluded to. I don't care. Yeah. In the original series, that was a big thing about the homunculi, especially with Lust and Greed. But, yeah, in this one, they didn't really touch on it at all, so... Oh. Oh, this is very minor. It doesn't really matter. But one thing that kind of got me was, and again, they didn't, like, establish this or anything anyway, so it's not even technically wrong in its own universe. But, and I know that they were just trying to wrap things up, but it did sort of bother me as a fan that when they kill Lust and Roy has the Philosopher's Stone, has her Philosopher's Stone and just gives it to Ed. In the original, he actually did pry the Philosopher's Stone out of her, and she crumbled, but then she just reformed around the Philosopher's Stone, because that is her life. Without the the only way to kill them is to kill them enough times that all of the lives that were in the Philosopher's Stone are dead, and then there's no Philosopher's Stone because it's out of lives, so it just crumbles. So you can't get a Philosopher's Stone from a homunculus. So again, that's just another, like, nitpicky, like, that's not how that works thing. Well, I mean, like, it doesn't matter because in this universe they never established it anyway, but it's just, I personally am like, that's not how that works, though. They sort of do establish that that's how it works, though, right? I mean, they do establish that it's human lives. They establish that it's human lives. They just didn't establish that if you rip the Philosopher's Stone out of them, that that doesn't actually kill them, because that is their life. Well, they also established, though, that, like, they are expending lives when they get hurt so bad they would be killed, though. Yeah, that's true. So in a way, they do, like, sort of imply. It sort of straddles this weird territory. Also, there was no Philosopher's Stone when they killed Envy. So that's another giant plot hole. Yeah, it's an inconsistency where they're, like, kind of straddling their own logic and the logic of the source material, and like they kind of don't commit to either, and therefore it doesn't make sense either way anymore. Because like it doesn't make sense that Envy left no Philosopher's Stone, and it doesn't make sense that Lust left a Philosopher's Stone, because like
I
the
guess,
rules are inconsistent.
Right. I guess if I was trying to like make a justification for it, I guess I would say that the way they were killed, like Envy, they did whittle down all of his lives, whereas with Lust, they didn't maybe they didn't kill all of her lives before they ripped out the stone, and that somehow did it, but that still doesn't super make sense.
Yeah. It's like a little bit. It's sort of a plot hole. It doesn't make a lot of sense, no matter how you slice it. I think
again, it's another thing that I can understand they just wanted to wrap things up, and it's another thing. Whereas with the Philosopher's Stone, like we were saying, that wouldn't have happened in canon. But I see why they wanted to do that, even though it doesn't make me happy.
It doesn't make you happy, but it's also like nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty in this movie that's nonsense, but that's kind of a big glaring one. I mean, like, you could forgive the as far as I'm concerned, you could forgive them deviating from the source material if it meant that they made a better movie. But they deviate from the source material, or they sort of like Frankenstein parts of it together to make a very subpar film. So it's like you don't get points for being accurate or not. Like, you know, the lines that you've lifted directly out of the movie, I don't care, because you've lifted them from the good anime and manga series and like sort of shoehorned them into this shit movie, so whatever.
I guess, in conclusion, if you're interested in Fullmetal Alchemist, watch the anime or read the manga.
Yeah. Or do both.
Do both.
Watch Brotherhood, watch the 03 one. Both series are very good.
Both are very good.
It's also very interesting in and of itself to see how they deviate.
Yeah. In a way, the 03 anime was an adaptation because they started it before the manga was done, so they had to deviate from the plot. And they actually did a pretty decent job.
Yeah.
It's still, like, a full story. And while Conqueror of Shambhala, which is the movie they made afterwards, is bad, but all things considered, since they didn't know where the plot was actually going, the 03 anime is still quite good. Brotherhood is better because it was made later after the manga series was complete, so the plot makes a little more sense because it was, you know, all Hiroma Arakawa's vision that she had from the start. But so if you only have time to watch one, I would recommend Brotherhood. But if you have time, all three are good and will give you the full experience, because while Brotherhood is extremely good, the first handful of episodes are less so because they did also have a problem of adaptation where they weren't sure whether they should cater to fans who have already seen the original series or new fans. So, like, they seemed to not want to repeat things that had already happened in the original anime, but they also didn't want to have no, they didn't want to just have no, like, setup. So they found this weird in-between that wasn't very good, unfortunately. Honestly, if anyone's interested, I have an actual way to watch them that makes a little more sense, where you basically watch a handful of episodes from 03 and then switch over to Brotherhood.
I think that if you're only going to watch one, do that. But if you're going to watch both of them, I would say start with 03 and then watch Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you start with Brotherhood, you do have to put up with that sort of weird beginning stuff.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
that might put you off.
Yeah, I would also recommend, if you do both, watch 03 first. One, because it does do a better job of like the first initial episodes setting everything up, because it does follow the manga in that regard. And that way, when you get to Brotherhood, the very first few episodes will make sense still. But just know that Brotherhood is better.
Yeah, Brotherhood wraps up a lot more cleanly than the 03 one does. Towards the end, the 03 one kind of goes off the rails.
Yeah.
But even in spite of that, I still think it's a really high quality.
Yeah, it's still quite well done. It's possibly the only anime I've watched that started before the manga finished and had to do a completely new plot that actually did a very good job. A lot of times, because I've watched other anime where the same thing happens. The manga's not really done, and they started because they gotta hop on that popularity. So then they do a whole different plot line, and it's usually bad.
Yeah. It's been such a long time since I've seen 03.
Yeah, me too.
Should watch it.
Yeah, we should. I also kind of want to watch Brotherhood again or read the manga.
Yeah, I want to watch Brotherhood again too. I'd be down to watch both again, honestly.
Yeah. Same.
It's like definitely one of my favorite animes. It's just so good.
It's so good. Fullmetal Alchemist was actually one of the first anime I'd ever watched, and to this day, it's still my favorite.
Yeah, 03 was like one of the first animes I watched. Because that's about when I was getting into anime, was when it was like coming out. Like,
I think 03 is on Netflix unless they recently took it down.
I think they might have taken it down.
Oh, did they?
I don't know, I can look.
It was there when I checked like a few weeks ago, I think. I happened to see it, but they might have taken it down since.
Jerks.
Oh, also, Fullmetal Alchemist is one of the best dubs.
That's true. The voice actors are really strong in that one. So if you're like me and you
both 3 and Brotherhood.
Yeah.
With Brotherhood, you can tell that at the beginning, the voice actors were kind of have to get back into it. Which again is another reason, if you're only going to watch one, I recommend starting with the first handful of episodes in 03 and then go over to Brotherhood. But then they sort of get back into the swing of it. They have FMA and Brotherhood. Okay.
Sick. I never actually watched the Conquest of
The Conqueror of Shambhala.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Yeah, that's what I heard. I was, after 03 wrapped up, I was really hyped to watch it, but like, you know, people who were more up on anime than I was, like, watched it before I did.
The only reason to really watch it is because 03 does leave with an open-ended ending.
Yeah.
So Conqueror of Shambhala does give you more closure, but it's not good.
You know, the thing is that, from my recollection, 03's ending, while it was like kind of a sort of cliffhanger in a sense, I didn't feel like I needed more closure than that.
Yeah.
I was sort of...
It's not a cliffhanger in the sense of like, oh my god, what happens next? It's more just an ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
Which isn't as big of a deal.
I was sort of content to rest on the ultimate fate of all the characters at the end of 03. Like, I know that the big thing happens, which I'm not going to talk about, but I kind of didn't feel compelled to dig any deeper than what was presented at the end of the anime.
Yeah, but after like reading the manga and watching Brotherhood, I did kind of wonder, and you know, again, spoilers. Do you care about spoilers for Shambhala?
I don't care about spoilers for Shambhala, but I don't know about the audience in terms of spoilers for 03.
Well, again, spoilers for this series that came out several years ago. So at the end of 03, they find out what the deal is with the homunculi, which is completely different from what happens in the manga, and like...
Can I be real for a minute here?
Yeah.
I do like the reason homunculi happen in 03 better than the reason they happen in Brotherhood.
Yeah, it was a good reason. I also liked that idea. Oops. But anyway, all that shit happens, and then Ed basically opens the gate again and goes through it and disappears, and Al gets his body back, but has none of his memories of the last several years since they did the human transmutation. And that's basically how it ends. And then in Conqueror of Shambhala, basically they find out that the gate that they open is not the gate of truth like in the manga and Brotherhood, but rather a portal to a parallel dimension.
They cover that before Shambhala. They cover that in the end of 03.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time since I watched it. But yeah, so that's basically what the gate is in that version. So Ed goes through and basically ends up in the real, quote unquote, the real world.
Earth.
And he's in Germany during the World War II. And he meets his father, who also went through the gate. And there's obviously no alchemy there, so he's basically spends the movie finding out about like this secret society that's trying to open up the gate and get to Amestris, because they think that that is Shambhala and it's like the promised land or whatever, and that they'll go there and rule Amestris and become like gods or whatever. That might not be entirely accurate. Again, it's been several years since I watched it, but that's the gist of it. And then meanwhile on the other side, Al is trying to open up the gate to get Ed back. And then also there, in this parallel dimension, there are also versions of characters from Fullmetal Alchemist. Like there's a Hughes there, and it's disappointing because first you're excited because like Hughes is alive, but then you find out he's a Nazi. And then there's another version of Al as well, who's friends with Ed. But it's sort of just all over the place, and it feels like they're trying to explain a lot of things that didn't really need explaining from the series, that were kind of left open-ended on purpose. And also, in terms of characters, it was less good, because like obviously they made original characters for it again, and they made this character that's like basically alternate dimension Rose, who was Ed's love interest for some reason, and she like betrays him and shit and blah blah blah, and it's just not very good.
Yeah, it sounds pretty bad.
Yeah. Honestly, a better ending is probably just watching 03 and not the movie like you did.
Yeah.
Oh, another point in Fullmetal Alchemist's favor. It's also the only anime that I've seen that has several openings and endings, and all of them are good.
Yeah.
Which is a matter of opinion, but in my opinion, a lot of series that are very long, you know, they change the opening and ending song every 12 episodes or so. And usually, some of them are good and some of them are bad. But Fullmetal Alchemist, both 03 and Brotherhood, pretty consistently have good songs. I can't think of a single one that was just meh or bad. It also has a good overall soundtrack. I feel like the soundtrack for 03 was a little bit better than the soundtrack in Brotherhood, but that might be nostalgia talking.
Yeah.
I'd have to watch them again, to be honest.
Yeah.
If nothing
03
else,
has
03
Ready
had...
Steady Go.
That's true. And if nothing else, 03 also has the Russians Brotherhood song, which is like gives you all the feels that they always play during the flashbacks. I think Brotherhood also has one of the opening songs is by Lark and Seal, which they're the band that did Ready Steady Go. Melissa, which is the very first opening in 03, is one of my favorites. But Again, which is the first opening for Brotherhood, is also very good. Again, all of the openings and endings are pretty good.
Yeah.
Which is uncommon. Stylistically, I guess they're both good for different reasons. Like Brotherhood, the aesthetic looks more like the manga. Budget-wise, I'm not sure which did better. It also came out later, so that has an advantage. And like the manga, it's a lot more obvious as the characters gradually age. The manga and Brotherhood do a very good job with that. It does have them, unlike most manga and anime, the characters do gradually age over time.
Yeah.
And you almost don't notice it until suddenly Ed's standing next to Winry and he's taller, but it's not. It doesn't seem like suddenly like what the fuck.
Right.
It's done well. Whereas with 03, I think it takes place over a shorter period of time, so they didn't really take into consideration them getting too much older.
Yeah.
Ah. But yeah. In conclusion, watch Fullmetal Alchemist, but not the live action.
Don't watch the live action movie. Just watch the animes.
Watch the animes. Read the manga. Personally, in terms of like just narratively, I would say the manga is probably the best. But that makes sense because it's the same with like books. You get the most out of the original source material. But Brotherhood does do a very good job of having pretty much everything in it be loyal. The only thing that you really miss is some character development a little bit. In particular, Hohenheim has a little bit more development in the manga. Like, he doesn't really have any in 03, but he's just sort of a shitty dad.
He's like a completely different character.
Yeah, he's a completely different character. In the manga and Brotherhood, he's painted more as a more understanding character. In the manga, he's actually almost... I'm not silly, but like seems less like a mysterious guy, I guess. He seems more like a real person than even in Brotherhood to me. So stuff like that, I would recommend the manga more. But again, if you don't really like reading manga, Brotherhood's a very loyal adaptation. How long have we been going?
We've been going for an hour and 40 minutes.
Ah. This episode is going to be called Live Action FMA is Garbage and Here's Why.
I don't know. How much longer do you want to go?
I don't know. The segment's usually at least a couple hours.
Yeah. This is starting to get late, I guess.
Yeah. Are you getting tired?
I'm not tired. I'm hungry.
Ah, got you. That's true. We do have to cook. I was going to talk a little about Voltron, but I don't have to.
You can talk about Voltron for a little bit. I mean,
true.
We're not jumping off right this second, but go ahead. I don't know anything about Voltron, so I'm gonna watch you talk about Voltron.
Okay. So I guess on the opposite end of this spectrum, Season 5 Voltron, pretty good. Season 4 was bad, but Season 5, pretty good. I like what they've done with Lotor's development. So Lotor is like one of the main antagonists, but he recently joined the good guys. And it's still not entirely clear if he's just like tricking them. He seems genuine so far, but everyone's pretty wary. But I think they've been doing a good job of like making it ambiguous. This season wrapped up a lot of plot points that have been sort of up in the air. Like Pidge found her dad finally. We've got confirmation that Shiro is some sort of either clone or a sleeper agent that's being controlled. Yeah, spoilers, by the way. Not that I figure that should be obvious by this point. My complaint is that, again, just like with season 3 and 4, they basically split up one season into 2. And I get that they probably did that so they can release content more often, but personally I'd rather wait a few months and just get the entire thing, because otherwise it feels like they're setting a bunch of stuff up, but I'm only getting half the story. And, you know, it's TV, so obviously they're not going to wrap up everything in one season, but it's to the point where it's like, it feels like this season's overarching story, I only got half. So I wish that they wouldn't do that. My other big complaint is probably the lack of Keith, who is my favorite character.
Which one's Keith?
He's the Red Paladin.
What is wrong? Is he not in it anymore? Where is he?
So, basically...
Did he get fired?
He left the group. So, one of the reasons season 4... Yeah. One of the reasons season 4 was bad was because, again, they split up the season. So season 3 built up a bunch of stuff to get you hyped for season 4, which would have been okay, except season 4 kind of just ignored a lot of that. Season 3 was all about setting up the changing of the Lions and Keith becoming the new leader. It was because Shiro, who is the Black Paladin, the leader, disappears, so they have to find a new paladin or something. Keith becomes the new leader and takes over the Black Lion. Lance, who was in the Blue Lion, takes the Red Lion, and then Alora, who was the princess and who kind of just stayed in the headquarters and helped them out with strategy and stuff, became the new Blue Paladin. And it was cool because, one, it made for character development and relationships and an interesting dynamic in the team, and two, it gave an actual reason for why their uniforms don't match their lions, like in the original. The original didn't do that. They just started out, I believe, with having mismatching colors for some reason. So it gave a narrative reason for that as well, which is another, not super important, but an added little bonus, I guess, that seemed a little clever. So after season 3, it does a really good job with that, setting that up. And you're like, and you know, everyone makes mistakes with their new lions, and Keith at first is like, I'm a bad leader because I don't know how to do this shit, which makes sense because, you know, he's sort of the loner character, and you jumping into suddenly being the leader is like, what? But in season 3, by the end, he does sort of start to improve and like figure out how to be a leader and work with the other team and the other team members and stuff. So I was really excited for season 4 to continue that. But pretty much right off the bat in season 4, Keith is like, actually, I'm gonna go join the Blade of Marmora, which is like this alien ninja assassin group, which isn't completely out of left field because part of his backstory is that he's half alien and he found out that his mom was in that group, so he has been training with them. But it's like, okay, but what about all of that build-up? Are you just gonna leave it? Was that for nothing? So and then also because of that, like both in season 4 and season 5, Keith got like one kind of really big character shift, I guess, but he was only in like a couple episodes. In season 4, it was when he joined the Blade of Marmora and he like became a cool ninja assassin guy. It's like, that's neat, and I'm glad you're learning more about your heritage, but you're only in 2 episodes. And then this season sort of had a similar thing where he's still with the Blade of Marmora and he like is only basically in 2 episodes. And what really got me was like, he didn't actually get to, it's bad enough he's like not with a group, but he didn't even get to talk to anyone. Like, the thing with Voltron is it has a lot of potential. It has really great characters. The plot is not always great, but the characters and their interactions, I think, is a lot of why people watch it. And it, like, didn't have that for him. And I was very disappointed. It had one major thing. He found his mother, who, like, left when he was a small baby.
Was she hot?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
There's so much fan art of her, like, within the first few hours of the season being released.
Mm-hmm. How much of that fan art is Keith shipped with her?
I hope none of it.
Well, you know that at least some of it will be.
But yeah, it's like it felt like the writers were like, oh, well, we gave Keith one big character beat, so that's fine.
Our work here is done.
Another thing is, like, I wouldn't be as upset about that if it meant that the other characters got more, like, screen time and development. Because I know, you know, they only have a limited amount of screen time to work with, and Keith was sort of a main character in the earlier seasons, so I would have understood if they sort of backed away from him a little bit to focus on other characters, but it felt like they didn't really do that. Well, okay, I guess they did with Lotor. He got a lot of screen time in this season, which makes sense because he's, like, sort of the new maybe antagonist, but, like, Pidge and Hunk and Lance have been the main characters from episode 1. It felt like Hunk didn't do anything this season. Pidge finally found her dad, but then he kind of left to go back to Earth immediately.
Everybody got to find their parents this season.
Yeah. It is a little ironic that Keith started out as, like, the only orphan character who had no family waiting for him back on Earth, and now he's the only character who actually has a parent with him right now. But, yeah, I don't know. I know I'm complaining a lot, but honestly, those are really my main complaints. Other than that, the season was actually quite good. We learned a lot about, like, Altea, and they found Allura had more screen time, which is nice because she's also a main character that deserves more. And we got confirmation of the Shiro clone or sleeper agent or whatever, so hopefully that'll get resolved in the next season. I don't know. Again, I think my main thing is I hope it's not like season 3 and 4, where season 3 was really good and set up a bunch of interesting things, but season 4 just dropped the ball on all of those things. So I'm hoping season 6 follows through on a lot of the things that they're setting up and they're not just like, oh, we're doing this so that you'll watch the next season, but we're not actually going to put any of that stuff in it.
That's the rub. That's the scam.
Yeah.
That's how they get you.
That's how they get you.
You're gonna get into season 6 and they're gonna be like, oh, we've resolved everything
Off screen. The real Shiro is back. Don't worry about it.
Keith is
back. Don't worry about it. Everything's cool now.
Hunk lost 25 pounds.
Rude. But anyway, I guess that's my very short, quick take on the new season of Ultron.
Lotor's a bad guy for real this time.
I could probably talk at length, but I know we're getting hungry.
Lotor is the king of the bad guys, or whatever, the elves?
Yeah.
I don't understand what Lotor is supposed to be. Is he an elf?
He's half Altean, half Galra. Alteans are the race that, like, the princess is.
They're the elves.
Yeah, the elves. The space elves.
Uh-huh.
And the Galra are the bad...
Space orcs.
Yeah. Oh yeah, another thing they did in this season was they added this... So generally speaking, so far, Voltron has not really done any sort of, like, romance subplots.
Romanza.
Like, all the relationships have been pretty platonic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Lance is a flirt, but there's no, like, serious relationship thing with anyone. But in this season, they decided, with Lotor joining them, that he and Allura has started sort of a thing. And honestly, a lot of my mixed feelings about this come from well, besides the fact that we don't know if Lotor is good or not, in the original Voltron series, which I haven't watched, but I know stuff about due to like just looking it up through interest, and also the fandom has said stuff and such. Lotor was, I don't know if he ever joined them temporarily or anything, but he was pretty much always an antagonist, and he was like super in love with Allura, but like in a typical creepy villain way. So because they seem to maybe be trying to give him a redemption arc, it's unclear if this like weird romance is good or not, I guess.
You don't want Altea to be caught in a bad romance.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. I am pretty indifferent to this ship, so I don't super care either way. But I feel like romance isn't gonna be the writer's strong suit. So, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of wary where this is going.
You know what my favorite ship is?
What?
Pigeon Blue Lion. It's so cute. They really work together.
Yeah. It's not even her lion.
I know,
It's
that's what makes
impressive.
that's what makes it so freaking saucy.
Yeah. Voltron actually has one of the best and one of the worst ship names.
What are they?
One is Lancelot, which is Lotor and Lance, which I don't really ship, but it is a good name. And the other one is Matt and Shiro, which is Shat.
That's a good name. Who the hell is Matt?
Matt is Pidge's brother, who went missing as well, who she found a couple seasons ago, I think.
Gotcha.
Last season, 1 or 2 seasons ago. I don't know. I am excited for the new season because, again, they set a bunch of this stuff up, but I've been burned before, so I'm also cautious. Ow. Rude. No, my
You've been
first place.
flattened.
I also hope Keith will come back, because I miss him. Any last remarks? I'll do one last race.
Voltron.
Voltron.
Is Voltron shipped with anyone?
Optimus Prime.
Voltron is the name of the ship of all 5 lions with
Yeah.
each other.
Basically.
What? New fan art of Voltron? Yeah. Yep. That's true. It's actually like postulated that humans are much larger than Inklings or Octolings.
I mean, Jed the cat is quite big compared to them, so...
Right, but also in Museum d'Alphonse, they have like human fossils, which are like enormous compared to the little jellyfish patrons that are in the museum. And since patrons are like, and since Inklings are like maybe twice as big as a jellyfish, then the humans would probably like, I don't know, then an Inkling would probably like be as tall as like a human's shin.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good joke.
What?
C Dewey's making a fan art of humans and inklings that's like Jurassic Park. And he's calling it Cenozoic Park.
That's pretty good.
That's very funny, Chris. Except the problem is that in order to recreate a human's natural habitat, it would just be like an island that looks like Seattle or something.
No.
Like they would get to that part in Jurassic Park where they like get out of the Jeep and it plays that big sweeping fucking John Williams anthem.
Yeah.
Where they look at the majesty of the dinosaurs, but instead the Inklings would get out of their like little Inkling Jeep and they'd see like some like scruffy white guy in flannel like texting and eating like a chocolate croissant at a Starbucks. Well, and it would be like copyright strike. You won. You
Yep.
didn't win.
Middleest place.
You got okayest place. Oh well. Well, I guess it makes sense that we end Mario Kart Monday on just sort of an okay note.
Yep.
Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
It's been fun.
it's been fun racing with you all this past year and talking about fandoms and watch your
Furries.
clips.
We will watch your clip later.
Oh, you don't want to watch it now?
Well, I don't. They won't be able to see it in the stream anyway.
I don't care about them. Oh, hold on. I can't hear it because I have headphones in. Hold on, I'll tell you what's I'll relate to
Okay.
you what's happening audioly.
Okay.
Okay. Some guy's talking about Squirrel Girl. I have a feeling that this isn't intended for me because I have no idea what's happening here.
Oh.
Let me start over. This is clearly about superheroes and I don't fucking know jack shit.
I don't know much about Squirrel Girl, but from what I do know, she seems pretty cool.
I hear that. Squirrel Girl. Pretty cool.
It's just like how Spider-Man just makes spiders appear out of his hands and attack people. Squirrel Girl just 6 squirrels on people. Yeah, I know very little about Squirrel Girl, but for what I do know, she seems to be like one of the more underrated heroes. That's actually pretty awesome. I've been meaning to check her out, but I never have yet.
Ah.
A big time Twitch guy. Doesn't know about who Squirrel Girl is. Here you go.
I don't know who Squirrel Girl is. I just know that her name rhymes. And that's cool enough. Alright, Mario Kart Monday's over. Forever.
Bye.
Until we get mad about another fandom thing. See ya!